stations. We will be live in 3, 2, 1.
Am I the only person that can't hear anything?
Nope, it's silent on my end too.
Okay, just curious.
Sure. Who's running the meeting?
Oh, here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, it looked like the light of my mic was on. All right, thank you. My name is Commissioner Pat Kemp, and I'm the chair of the HART Strategic Planning and External Relations Committee. Councilman Chisler, vice chair of the Operations and Safety Committee, is attending the meeting virtually. He's chairing today in the absence of Chair Williams. Welcome to the June 21st, 2021 Joint Strategic Planning and External Relations and Operations and Safety Committee meeting. We're covering almost everything. The meeting format is hybrid. Quorum is not physically present at the HART Administrative Office, 1201 East 7th Avenue, Florida Conference Room, and others that are participating, board members, are participating via communication media technology. So please look at the screen of your devices. An image of the flag is displayed, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. And staff, could you please do a roll call at this time?
Yes, Madam Chair. This is Danielle from HART. Director Frazier?
Present.
Director Hudson?
Here.
Director Johnson?
Here.
Committee Chair Kemp?
Here.
Director Knight? Director Overman?
Here.
Director McLean?
Here.
Committee Chair Schisler?
Here.
And Director Williams?
Okay. And if there are no objections, I'd suggest that this meeting is facilitated by one chair to streamline the agenda flow and allow one person to monitor participation of the committee members, both present in the room and virtually. Hearing no objections, we won't do approval of the minutes at this time because we do not have an in-person quorum. We have public comment next, but we have no one signed up for public comment. So at this time, I'm going to move next to our strategic planning discussion. And right now, we will introduce Ms. Adelie LeGrand, the HART Chief Executive Officer. You're recognized to kick off this exercise.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Kemp. Appreciate this opportunity to address you today with this exciting topic. So I know for the last couple of months we've talked about the importance of a strategic plan for the agency and how it can really help us to map out together where we'd like to go and the role that public mobility will play as the county grows and the region grows. So today, with our discussion, or our plan discussion, we really want to have a conversation and provide some background information, but then engage with all of you, those of you who are present in the room, as well as those of you on the phone, to start having the conversation about who we are right now, who do we want to be, and what is it going to take for us to be that, agency of choice. So again, if we can just keep that, if there's like a mini parking lot that you have, who are we now, who do we want to be, and what do we need to do to be that? And what we're going to do, the structure for today is staff is going to go through a PowerPoint presentation and, to help us, again, understand the background of where we are also looking at where some of the projected growth is in the region, and then just having a conversation around, what do we think about the service we're providing? What level of service do we want to provide later? And again, hearing from you. So don't look at this as a one-way presentation that you're just waiting to the end to ask questions. It's really about being actively engaged throughout the process, stopping us as we go so that we can have a very robust conversation. So with that, I'm going to ask staff to come and make the presentation. And again, this was a very collaborative effort. You'll see on the slide, it has Justin and Lorena's name on it as well. Chris and I would say Terry, several of us have touched this material, so I want to thank everyone for their participation in pulling this together. So, okay, Chris, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LeGrand. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members, committee members. For the record, Christopher Cochran, Director of Service Development. As Ms. LeGrand has so elegantly put, we're pleased to be able to introduce to you leadership and staff's progress on developing our strategic plan to date. As presented previously in some updates, HART's strategic plan will be the foundation upon which HART defines our priorities throughout our communities, as well as internally as we identify these rapidly evolving needs throughout our county, and as well as those within the organization that we need to identify and focus on to be able to meet those needs out in the community. So at this time, I'm going to introduce and hand over to Justin Willits, is Senior Planner, as well as Lorena Hardwick, who is our Director of Government Relations, who's going to present you a comprehensive set of data and information that we have been able to compile, not only from our own COA that we have been able to, that we have done over the past year, as well as a culmination of information from studies from multiple agencies throughout the region. So at this point in time, I'll hand it over to Lorena Hardwick. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, Chair, Board, Ms. LeGrand, and staff. Next slide, please. Or I guess I can I tab it myself, Danielle? Am I able to? Oh. Okay, thank you.
Yours is independent.
Got it, okay, thank you. All right, as you all can see, this is a quick snapshot of our strategic planning process. In the listening and learning phase, we partner with the City of Tampa on their citywide moves listening sessions. We did work with their consultants to add a few questions specific to public transit as part of their survey and throughout sessions as part of the live polling for participants. Previous to that, our staff and leadership has been continuously engaged with the community through direct outreach and engagement opportunities. In the next phase that we have been in with exploring opportunities, as was mentioned, there have been numerous studies performed in Hillsborough County that address the growth, disparities, as well as the demands and needs of our communities. These studies were explored through the lens of transit to ensure that we could find the correlation to HART, and that will allow us to identify the areas where we can make those contributions and solve the needs as an agency. In this phase that we're currently in right now, that we're engaging with you in, is we are now in that visioning process, and we want to explore whether our current mission, which is HART takes people to the places that enhance their lives, and vision, which is HART invites, inspires, and implements sustainable and innovative transportation. Do those translate to what we do, where we are, and where we want to be as an agency? From this exploration and exercises, we hope to create SMART goals and measurable objectives that help guide our staff and departments. The next steps in the process, as you see through our timeline towards the rest part of this year and through the first portion of next year, will take us into planning, development, and evaluation. This next slide provides a snapshot to remind us of what our size of our fleet is, the services that we provide, the different facilities and stops, how many routes we have, and make sure that we're cognizant of how much and what types of service we have the capacity to provide in order to adjust those and adapt to our future as our needs grow and as innovation in transit improves. And I will now flip it over to Justin.
Morning, Madam Chair, Board, Mr. Grant. Justin Willett, Senior Planner for the record. And I'm going to take us through the bulk of this presentation, and as previously stated, feel free to jump in as you wish, and we will have some good discussion about our existing service and future priorities. Sorry about that. So to start off, where we kind of began this process was looking at the last 5 years of local and regional studies that most of us are pretty familiar with. We went through a lot of the HART studies over that time, from Plant City to the TOD pilot program, the arterial BRT study, our multiple COAs completed over the last 5 years, the reevaluation most recently in 2020, which will be the basis of a lot of the analysis you're going to see today. We also looked at the South Shore Transit Reevaluation Study, the Operations and Maintenance Feasibility Study, to be HART specific. When we moved on to the NPO and Planning Commission studies, we looked at affordable housing and transit, the Vision Zero Action Plan, the USF Autonomous Transit Feasibility Study, Innovation District Circulators, Brandon Corridor and Mixed-Use Centers pilots, Northwest Hillsborough Transit Study, Cross Bay Ferry, and their long-range transportation plan. Focusing on the city of Tampa, we looked at the Heights Mobility Study, their Fowler Avenue Study, specifically as it relates to the BRT project. The Tampa Intermodal Center Study, West Shore Regional Multimodal Center, and Tampa Bay Next, to really get a sense of how all of those fit in. Those were a bunch of the FDOT studies. The city-specific ones were Walk Bike 6 for West Tampa, the multimodal plan, the Envision Streetcar Study, the West River Multimodal Improvements, which have recently been awarded federal funding, the Imagine 2040 Comprehensive Plan, and the Mayor's T3 Plan. And also recently released the Resilient Tampa Roadmap, identifying sustainable initiatives at the city level. Jumping over to T-BARTA, we looked at their Envision 2030 Transit Development Plan, the Regional Rapid Transit Study, their Innovative Transit Technologies Feasibility Study, Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, and the Transit Asset Management Plan, referred to as the TAM Plan. And then in the other category, we looked at not so flattering report by Dangerous by Design 2020 that identifies the Tampa Bay region again as having a lot of safety issues. We looked at the Innovation District Mobility Master Plan, and we also looked at the Tampa Bay Partnerships Job Access Report that was recently completed. So what we wanted to do is we looked across all of these studies at the local and regional level, and we wanted to pull out the major takeaways. And the four most common themes that we found were something that we've heard a lot about is connecting downtown, West Shore, and USF with each other and the region. Our customers and many of these studies point to the need for expanded service, as in coverage, and also increased frequency to attract riders and provide a robust network. And another one that pops in one of our specific studies, the TOD study, is transit-supported policies for growth and affordable housing. We know affordability is becoming even more of an issue over the last few years and is not going away anytime soon. We know we don't have the policies in place in a lot of areas to support the existing transit we have, or to support a lot of the future transit I think we hope to have. And then finally, the fourth, safe access and mobility for all, whether it's the Dangerous by Design report or the Vision Zero efforts going on at the city and county level. We know that the most vulnerable roadway users specifically bicyclists and pedestrians, are 98% of our riders before and after they get on the bus. So making sure that Vision Zero and safety is at the front of our minds and everything we do is very important. So to give us a little look at what...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Director McLean. I just have a few questions before we start digging deep into this, and some of those questions might have been answered in another form, and maybe I wasn't in attendance there, but if I could ask Justin and maybe Lorraine just a few questions before we proceed, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Justin, and it gets back to one of the original slides which showed the timeline. My questions really go back to, I'm under the impression that HART already has a strategic plan in place. And so as I look at the slide you've got on the board, I show January 2021 through December 2022. That, in my mind, is 2 full years to complete a strategic plan update. So my question to you is, do we have a plan already on the shelf, and are we updating that plan, or are we totally throwing that plan out and revamping it with this one?
So I believe you're referring to the Transit Development Plan, which is an annual update. That's more of the technical planning work that we do on an annual basis to submit to FDOT, which we are currently updating for this year. The strategic plan is something that will lead into an updated transit development plan for next year. But as of right now, this is the more of a visioning and strategic plan for the agency as a whole, whereas the TDP is a more technical service-specific document.
Okay, so you're telling me that HART does not have a strategic plan on the books?
So, Director McLean, good morning. This is Adelie LeGrand.
Good morning.
So, I know it's hard to wrap your mind around the fact that there's a transit agency who's been doing business all this time and we don't have a 20-year strategic plan. But the answer to your question is we don't. So, what we have, as Justin mentioned, is a series, if you will, of lists of projects that we have identified that we'd like to move forward based on different sets of analyses, if it's through a TDP or a COA or another study from another agency that says we need to provide more service in a specific corridor. But we do not have one document that clearly states what it is that HART wants to do. How does HART see itself in this region? What is the role that HART would like to play? We don't have a document that speaks our voice. And you're right, this is a timeline that's taking us from 21 through 22. And the reason why, we need this additional time, if you see, most of the work is going to happen in the last 2 phases, which is to develop our strategies, the trade-offs and opportunities. And, it's important for us as we finish the visioning phase this calendar year, once we have our vision, our mission, our goals, and we identify how we want to evaluate our success, then we have to develop the strategy so that we can actually get there. And if it's done correctly, it needs to take time, because it's easy for those of us, who have an idea, for us to say, okay, this is a strategy, this is what we want to implement, but then we're not coordinating, let's say, with the port, or we're not coordinating with, the West Shore Alliance, or we haven't gotten any input from developers on what they're planning to do in the next 10 years, or we don't know what all the permits are for developments that are coming online within the next, 3 to 5 years. So that evaluating options phase is really where the detailed work comes in for us to now start identifying the specific strategies that will really turn into action items for us, which in lay terms, those are the actual projects that will be moving forward. And those will reflect both capital and operating projects. So our strategy could be to ensure that we identify a hierarchy of travel corridors and work to make sure that we have, the appropriate vehicles to have high-capacity transit in those corridors by 2025 or by 2030. So once we identify specific strategies, then what will happen next is we'll tie our budgeting exercises into implementing those strategies on a year-over-year basis. So it is going to take us until the end of December of 2022, but by that time, we'll be able to connect our strategies to our budgeting process, and then as a board, as a collective, you'll be able to determine, if we're making the right decisions based on implementing our strategies and not just based on this is what we're presenting as our budget, this is what we'd like to move forward, and you're just making decisions without having a plan to connect those decisions to. So I hope that answered your question. I know that was a long response, but if it wasn't clear, please ask me, and I'm more than willing to spend a little more time on this.
Ms. Guerin, thank you very much. Very clear and very well detailed out. I do appreciate that. I am just a little bit shocked that we didn't have a sitting strategic plan on the shelves that we would go in and, of course, update as things change. And so that timeline caught me a little off guard, which now I understand why. So thank you for the update, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we'll continue with the presentation.
So back to, and this is really the stretch where we're going to just talk about our existing service and what we currently are doing. So our frequent network, as you saw in the first phase of that slide, Florida, Nebraska in the streetcar at 15 minutes on the weekday. Our 20-minute service on Hillsborough Avenue and 56th Street, and then our 30-minute service includes Waters Avenue, Bush Boulevard.
I think the slides aren't moving with your words.
Progressed a little rapidly.
So I just think it'll be difficult for people to follow, that's all.
So that's our 15-minute service network running north-south downtown to USF on Florida and Nebraska, and the streetcar included. The 20-minute service network on Hillsborough Avenue and 56th Street, and our 30-minute service network that includes Waters Avenue, Bush, 22nd Street through East Tampa from downtown to the university area, and a connection from the university area to West Shore. And then our hourly service network was the last piece there that covers most of the county at this time, is the majority of our service that's on the street at this time. That includes some regional service, both peak hour from the Brandon area and Fishhawk, and hourly service from the Brandon area through downtown to MacDill Air Force Base, and also the regional connection on Bruce B. Downs from Wesley Chapel through the university area along Fowler to downtown. Next slide. So when we look at the population we serve, we like to look at population density. So that's what you're seeing on this map. For ADA purposes, we look at a half a mile. So that's what the inside buffer you see there on the map. But for our conversation, we really want to look at walkability and a quarter mile. So that's the data that we'll focus on for today. And as you can see, within a quarter mile of our existing service bus stops, that is, we serve about 32% of the population. You can see the various densities for residential population. You get a lot of those numbers in the university area, where you also see a lot of our ridership. Some areas scattered throughout the city and county do get into that 10 to 20 dwelling units per acre, but not quite as popping as some of the other metrics that we'll look at, which I think will tell a bit of the story about where we are today. Next slide. So when we look specifically at metrics for drivers of our ridership, minority populations are one major one. We serve about 37% of the minority population in Hillsborough County within a quarter mile. Largest concentrations are Forest Hills, Sulphur Springs, University area, the Heights in East Tampa, West Tampa, and Town and Country, and the Lake Lido, Egypt Lake area. You see, again, a lot of those darker areas correspond to a lot of our service, particularly that East Tampa and University area. Next slide. Looking further at low-income populations, a similar story. A little more spread out than the previous metric, about 47% within a quarter mile, a lot of the similar concentrations. But one of the kind of pleasantly surprising metrics, I think we were all, relatively surprised at how well we actually do serve the existing subsidized housing units within the county. About 94% are within a quarter mile. I thought that was a really good metric, although it's not something that we can just rest on. I think we need to make sure that we're serving those people very well. Just because they have service doesn't necessarily mean we're meeting those needs, so that's something that we need to think about and talk about more as we move into the future. When we look at where those populations are in affordable units, we looked at the kind of the big ones in Tampa. West River is still coming out of the ground on Main Street in West Tampa. About 1,000 units in Robles Park, which has access to some of our best service as it currently exists. Just under 2,000 units at Encore in downtown, with about a quarter mile from Marion Transit Center. And then over 20,000 units throughout the county, a lot in the Brandon area, not so much in Northwest, but tends to be pretty consistent with our service as it exists. And again, we want to think about how to serve them better. Just because they have service doesn't mean it's working great for everyone. So this starts to tell the story a little bit more. The population we're serving for jobs and employment densities, and this is one of those drivers of why we always see West Shore downtown and University area pop. Over 20 units per acre, you see West Shore, Rocky Point, and downtown really popping on this map, and a little bit more scattered throughout our service area. As we get into some additional ones, kind of think about what those existing densities are, but where are the policies in place that are going to help transit? And we'll get there very soon, like right now. So when we talk about transit-supported policies...
Can I just ask, one thing you mentioned was the university area, but you didn't give the jobs per an acre? I didn't see that.
I can pull that up separately and get that to you, but I don't have it on the slide.
Oh, I was really curious. It seems like it would be, because 41 jobs per an acre at downtown and then 10.
It's about 11 to 15, most of what we're seeing pop in the university area. There is a little bit, basically between 10 and 20. So it's not quite as dense as some of the downtown and West Shore at this point.
Thanks.
So when we talk about transit-supported policies, I know many of you have been involved in the TOD study, which is diving into this a little more deeply. But at a high level, the things that support transit are right-priced parking policies, charging people to park, good land use zoning, and parking requirement reductions. A lot of the history of the development in this area and the nation more broadly is really tied to automobile capacity and parking being included in developments, which is why we have and continue to struggle to compete with that mode. And then affordability near transit. Those were kind of the three ones we wanted to drive home. And where are those policies at? Downtown obviously has the density, land use and zoning, and good service of transit, and then the parking policies in place. So that kind of hits a lot of marks, and with some affordability in the Encore area that is still getting built out. Looking at West Shore and the airport, charges for parking, we do a pretty good job of serving the airport, but the West Shore district at large is still, fairly suburban, not any charge parking on street. So it's really hard for us to compete over there, considering the types of jobs that are in West Shore, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. But then McDill, they do offer some transit subsidies, which is good, but it's still not really moving the needle a lot there. And in the university area, USF does kind of restrict parking to a certain extent, but it's quite a sprawling campus, again, but something we need to serve better, generally. And where are they needed? Really wanted to point back to the TOD effort, because we know they're needed not everywhere, but through most of our service area, we need to do a better job of getting these policies in place so that even our existing service is more successful, but our future service has a lot more potential as well. And the policies coming out of the TOD study are designed to be applied more broadly throughout the city and the county. This was some cell phone data done during the most recent COA operations analysis that we completed, and it really wanted to compare all trips from cell phone users, which is 95% of the trips in the region, I think, are done by single occupancy vehicles, so that's mostly what we're looking at. But again, the same themes emerge: West Shore, downtown, USF, and Brandon. And the takeaways from this part of the analysis were that we do a really good job serving those areas. If they have a high trip density for all modes, we tend to serve them really well with our existing transit service. There is one specific area that came up that we do not serve well, which is not a great surprise, but Rocky Point, it's a bit of an island out there. It's hard to get to. Connectivity is difficult, but that's something that's been on our radar. The other two places that came up through this analysis were I-275 in Bears and Palmacy and Hyde Park. And those are places we've done recent minor improvements to a couple of routes to better address that, but are still on our radar for trying to do more in the near term. So looking at some of that employee travel information, the Tampa Downtown Partnership performed their biennial employee survey, resident and employee survey. But based on
Can we go back to the other mapping?
Sure.
Yes. So this was cell phone of all trips over a period, because I'm just a little, I mean, it does show up, I-4 and I-275, it shows up, but it doesn't show up nearly as strong as I would think.
So it's primarily like origin and destinations from those places.
Okay, that's why Brandon is up, but there's no like line to it or anything?
Yeah, but it also grabs, it's not just home and work, it's like stop and start. So you're picking up, that's why the Brandon Mall is popping a little bit. So it's not as clean as you might suspect.
Okay, so this is destination and origin,
Yeah,
okay.
this could represent, say, 4 or 5 trips throughout the day. It's not just a single morning and afternoon trip.
And I would want to offer that this is a key change or a shift in the way we need to start thinking about public mobility, right? For a long time, it's about going from home and going to work. You know, in the, travel demand model, we call it a home-based work trip. And that's really what we would model for years. Like all the time, I've been doing this work. If you were going after federal funds, you would, model your home-based work trip, and that's really what transit was supporting. What we're seeing before COVID is that a lot of people are taking trips outside of just going from home to work, and that transit wasn't really making or meeting those needs, right? So that's something that we could put on a parking lot. And we do have some flip charts. I know those of you who are not here in person, maybe you can have your own mini flip charts. I should have thought ahead and sent you all small little post-it flip charts, but next time. But, that's something we could put on our board right now is, asking ourselves the question, do we want to only provide home to work trips, or do we want to be an agency that's providing all the trips that people want to take that they can take by transit, right? So the cell phone data is really looking at every trip that somebody is making. So if it's, like Justin said, if it's going from home to work, but if it's going from work to a doctor's appointment, if it's going from the doctor's appointment back to work, all those discrete trips is what the AirSage data was drawing, and this work was done under the COA from 2013 to 2018. So this is data that happened before COVID. So again, even before COVID, you're seeing that there are a lot of trips that are being made. Now, post-COVID, we also recognize that there's a shift in the way people are moving around. So again, for our question, for us to ask ourselves is, do we just want to focus on home-based work trips, or do we want to focus also on home-based other trips, is what they call it technically? And if that is the case, what does that look like? And we'll get to, what that looks like a little bit later, but I think that's a good question for us to start thinking about.
Great, thank you. I just want to say, too, I'm really...
Sorry, just a quick question. Just a clarification on this data. Does this show, this is going to be a dumb question, does this show all arrivals? Like, if you do a trip from home to work and back home, how many spots is that? Is that 2, because you have 2 arrivals, or your third because you ultimately come back home?
That would be shown twice on this map.
Okay, so double count. Okay.
Home, work, errand, home, that would be 4 trips.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, okay, sorry.
We're still getting used to the cell
No,
phone.
that's good. I always think about that whenever I hear about transit travel. It's so critical, I think. And I just want to say, though, I'm really pleased. We haven't had the technology to have a cell phone or, that I know of before. And I've always thought we needed that. This is a great tool in the toolkit to be analyzing through. And I appreciate your comments about how to look at it differently, because as well, I mean, the focus has always been on you capture the commute. That's always the significant part that you capture, and you're talking about something a bit different.
Exactly. Well, we're talking about that, the commute, as well as the other trips.
I understand.
Right? So
Yeah,
it's
broader.
Right. Does it make sense to leave this extra, again, looking at it through a business, does it make sense to leave this extra opportunity on the table? Or is there any value in us really looking at it and being deliberate and targeting those trip patterns as well? So,
And then
thank you, Jason.
Sure. And just to clarify, the next slide was taking that cell phone data and comparing it to the trip density of our HART ridership. And basically, we wanted to know, are we overserving any areas or underserving any areas? And we're not overserving. As most of us know, we don't have the resources to overserve. But we were underserving the Rocky Point area, like I said, and a couple of other spots that are on our radar for short-term improvements and longer-term budgeting. And then back to the downtown.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Overman, I don't know if I missed your hand or if it just went up.
It did just go up, and I would like to go back to the last slide, please. So as compared to the next slide, there are some areas, it looks like, where there was high trips, as opposed to the next slide that doesn't show any trips to some degree or service in that area. So, for example, if you go back to the other slide, you'll see that, Plant City actually has a high origin destination rating, as well as right around the interstate. I guess that's north of Brandon, as well as obviously up in the New Tampa, right on the Hillsborough County line, as well as Oldsmar. It looks like, is that Oldsmar over to the west? It's very high and high. And those look like those might be commuter-based types of trips, as opposed to, say, for example, the Brandon area, the university area, or downtown, or even, those areas where we have hospitals. So, for example, where St. Joe's might be that red bob in the middle to the east of, maybe is what it looks like. But it does look like there is a discrepancy with, as compared to the other next chart. But it does see that some of it points out the differences between the commuter traffic and the density associated with that, as well as the basic service traffic that oftentimes people utilize throughout the day and on the weekends. Does that jive with what you're seeing, Justin?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, we are picking up a ton, obviously, 95% automobile traffic. We're picking up a lot of the pre-COVID commuter traffic here. And yeah, we're really comparing is those kind of internal trips within the county compared with the cell phone data compared to the next slide of the ridership on our existing service as it meets those. But yeah, there are still some gaps, and but yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Thank you.
And I think that was a good catch. I'd just like to point out that for years, I have talked about Oldsmar, because Oldsmar, and this is just from memory, has 12,000 residents and 40,000 people a day that come there to work. That could be wrong, but I'm just going from memory because we have Nielsen there. And as well, it's a place where the CSX tracks go right through. But I've always thought it's been under-recognized as an area where, and it's right on the county lines, Pinellas and Hillsborough, as an area where there could that we should be thinking about, that we don't. And as well, I'd just like to ask too, of course, with I-4, that when we go back, but this is interesting. So right there where it darkens up a little at I-4, what is exactly at that area?
So cell phone data is not perfect, and I've heard one of the flaws is that stop-and-go traffic can make a few of these things pop. So you have to take everything along the interstate with a little bit of a grain of salt.
Okay, because I wasn't clear what could exactly be there. That would be a big, okay.
Congestion.
Okay, thank you.
It may also be that that's where the fairgrounds are, and it looks like the fairgrounds, Sable Park, there's a bit of a complex sort of in that area, if I'm guessing that correctly, based on what I can see.
Yeah, I think this was a snapshot of 1 week, like in October of 2019, where they aggregated the data across sectors.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so, back to the downtown partnerships biannual survey. You see a lot of those home locations in South Tampa, the Heights, and Lowry Park type trips, and then the Brandon area and Riverview. The Heights and Lowry Park and Riverview have some pretty good service to downtown, both peak and just frequent local service. South Tampa, not so much, and some of the other metrics that we look at as far as income and kind of our predictors of not a ton of ridership historically from South Tampa, and also why there has been some service removed from there in recent history. Looking at the West Shore, a similar employee survey was probably not too surprising, but about 30% of the trips into the business district, according to the 2017 worker survey, were coming from Pasco Pinellas, 67% from Hillsborough, and then when we looked at the census data, it's about 50% from Hillsborough, and similar for Pasco Pinellas. So a lot of those regional type trips are more common for the West Shore district than it would appear for downtown, related to their employees specifically. And then looking at the last 5 years of ridership, fixed route bus has been steadily declining before the implementation of Mission Max in 2017-18. And then, of course, during COVID, it's coming back now. I believe we're at about 19,000 to 20,000 daily trips. And I can touch on that a bit more on a next slide. But the streetcar, obviously, you're seeing a big bump when the fare free and service span was increased. Paratransit has been growing pretty consistently, and HART Flex had declined significantly in 2020, and we changed up how we were serving that.
So, for this slide, something to pay attention to is that even with the declining ridership and the bus ridership, the lion's share of our, ridership comes from bus service. So, yes, it's great to show that the streetcar ridership was increasing. It's kind of flat right now because of COVID, but still, even with the increase, it pales in comparison to what we're providing with bus service. So bus service needs to be recognized as the backbone of what we're doing here at HART. And if we're going to, again, start talking about our future, we need to think about strategically and also deliberately, what does our bus service look like? And not, I know, there's a lot of conversations about other modes, and they're important as well. But if we can't, I would say, shore up our bus service and make sure that it's as efficient as possible, whatever we add to it won't be as successful as it could be if we did this the right way. So again, this is something else for the parking lot. Really, what is the role of our bus service for our overall future? Thank you, Justin.
And I'd just like to say, too, from what I understand and have read across the country, at least in the U.S., is that there are only 2 places where and they have subways, where they have more ridership by rail or some other mode than the bus, and that's Washington, D.C. and New York. And other than that, the bus is the heartbeat and the core of every transit system in the country. I think it's important for people to know that, and we can make it work even better with all, on board, with all, ticketing, with the way that we do with dedicated corridors, so it makes it almost as if they were train services, because they're frequent and they serve well, and it's a good ride, and it's working in other jurisdictions around the country. But as well, if we saw, and I've seen this before, this goes from 2016 to 2020, but I've seen the service that has gone from earlier, let's say 2010 or even 2008, and what you see when you see that is a steep climb in our ridership that was all the way at 2016. So when you're seeing 2016, you're seeing there a plateau after what was years of a very steep climb. And not only that, if you parallel our budget to that steep climb, our budget doesn't work with that. We've gotten an ad valorem tax of $500,000, and it nowhere, our service increased so much, the number of people we were serving increased very, very a steep curve relative to our budget that we did not have, I should say. So I think that tells a bigger story, because all we're seeing here is what was a decline, back to some earlier years, but our budget has never kept up in any way with even the service we were giving.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing to some of the things that we look at on a future slide, so we'll kind of circle back to that. We did take a little snapshot of what the streetcar has done since the fare free was implemented, so I'll just get through this fairly quickly. But weekday has always been a bit lower than Saturday, Sunday. We do a lot of entertainment and tourism type trips on the weekend. I think a lot of the residents of Hillsborough County kind of come out and enjoy that as well. We saw everything growing a bit in 2019, and then of course, we dropped off quite a bit in 2020, but not as much as I think some of us might have expected. And then as 2021 begins, I keep forgetting I'm not in control of the progression, so I apologize. And then as we get into 2021, we are seeing some ridership numbers come back. The weekday is still maybe a little bit slower than Saturday, as the downtown offices aren't fully occupied, and I think that has a trickle-down effect to some of our riders accessing jobs. So, as I alluded to a moment ago, some of the contributing factors and trends that really affect our ridership locally, some of these can be national trends, some of them are very specific to this. Obviously, the fare-free streetcar we've touched on quite a bit. I referenced the population access to transit after the service changes in 2017, 2018. Declining our footprint by 25%, correlated to a 10% decrease in ridership. Fuel costs going down also tends to decrease our ridership. That was kind of the story around 2018 to 2015, some of those fluctuations. The limited transit supportive policies is something that we always have struggled with in the area. And then, strangely, as unemployment numbers go down, it may be counterintuitive to some, but as unemployment numbers go down, so does our ridership. When people get economic mobility here, they tend to make their first purchase on transportation or vehicle, which we try to provide a service where folks don't have to do that, but it's often the case that they still do. So we wanted to also look where we're currently growing. We took a snapshot from the Bureau of Economic Research out of the University of Florida. And we looked first at 2015 to 2020, saw a lot of growth in the city of Tampa, 22%, and then about 3/4 in unincorporated county. And then we looked really more focused at just the last year, and really saw that jump in unincorporated county, which a few of our board members are more familiar with than I am. But that really struck me. for those of us who don't live too far out of the city, we see a lot of that growth in town, but we don't feel it as much as some of those folks in unincorporated counties. So that was very telling to me, very informative about how we need to think about how we're currently doing and how we need to do in the future. So we also looked at the 2045 hybrid growth scenario of the MPO, and this is a little more consistent with the data that I just showed, right? The population growth is happening in the city, especially in unincorporated county. The city is seeing a lot of growth in the scenario as well. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that at the front of our mind.
I see that Gil Schisler, Councilman Schisler has his hand up. I don't know where that noise is coming from. Somebody has a, okay. And Councilman, did you want to speak at this point?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you go back 2 slides, please? I was trying to put my hand up, but it wouldn't go up. Could you, first of all, describe what does limited transit supportive policies mean in about 30 seconds? What are you talking about there?
So I touched on that a little bit earlier, but really, policies that mandate parking requirements in fairly well-served transit areas where we have a good existing service really tend to...
Okay, all right. Okay, that's fine. I understand that. All right. Okay, then move forward to the next slide, if you will, for the population growth. Temple Terrace and new residents, and we need to maybe chat about that a little bit. For example, the 1,265, what is that being based upon? And that time frame, but going forward, it's significantly more than that with our redevelopment district and about 3 other substantive construction areas that are going on. So we may need to, you may need to look back at that a little bit, just as a point of reference. That's all. I don't want to hold up the presentation, but just something we need to look at moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, noted. Yeah, these came from the University of Florida Bieber project population data, so we will take a closer look at that and let you know if there's anything in there, any discrepancies. Okay, moving back to, so where the population growth is projected is fairly well distributed through the city of Tampa and unincorporated county, but a lot of South County and Brandon area showing up on these projections. This is, again, 2045 hybrid scenario done by the Planning Commission. But then when we look at the jobs, again, we really have those core 3 areas, downtown, West Shore, and the university area, and a little bit in Brandon here. So it's another one of those things. We know where we're growing population-wise. We know where the jobs are planned, which may need to be adjusted after this new environment we found ourselves in the last year and a half. But really, where there is good employment density, transit is likely to work the best. So we need to get the population, which is really growing everywhere, with the best service we can provide to those destinations that have the highest chance of return. So we did just a little exercise of, what it would take to go from serving 32% of our population to serving 50%. And basically expanding that out just from operating dollars, it's $86 million in 2020, would be an increase of about $50 million annually just in our operating dollars. That's not projecting any capital purchases of vehicles, bus stop maintenance, or station enhancement, but just kind of a raw level of order of magnitude increase over what we have today. If we wanted to serve our 50% of our population within a quarter mile. Like, is that the direction we want to go? Do we focus on something smaller, or do we want to be more ambitious? Do we want to, those are some of the questions I think that we wanted to pose and discuss with you all. And with that, I think I will hand it back to Lorena, and we'll open it up for more discussion in a moment.
Yes, I think this is...
Can I ask I know that, sorry, about that last slide you gave. It's really important. with 50%. And I know it's just a vast of calculations, and it's one for us to be noted of. I say it takes operations from 86 million to 134 million, and that's just operations. And when you say to reach the population within a quarter mile, but that could just be serving, that population with a bus an hour.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's just.
With the barest of service, just to do that rough calculation.
Simply access the service.
Okay, thank
We
you.
want to use a metric like, with more frequent service within a certain amount of time. I think those are the kind of long-term strategic questions that we want to.
Mhm.
Right, and also, like, how do we want to phase it in, right? So do we want to say, within the next 5 years, we want to hit, 37% of the population, and that's our target, and then within the next 5 years, we want to hit 40%, or, whatever the numbers are, but we can also look at it as a way for us to, on an annual basis, look at how we improve our service. So those are some of the conversations that we want to have with you. And this is not the first time that we're going to have these conversations, because if you remember the timeline, we have several opportunities to engage. But what we wanted to do today was at least kick off the conversation and share with you, some of the questions that we're going to be posing, not only to you as our leadership team, but then after we finish this discussion with you and kicking off this process formally, talking to our operators. A lot of this has to also be an internal strategic planning process because they're on the streets, and to understand, what they see, where the challenges, provide them some information to just, make sure that we're in alignment with what's really going on the front lines, and then coming back to you again and having a series of conversations. So, this slide, when Justin and the team, talked about presenting this information, I thought it would be a good way to pretty much open up our formal conversation piece of the presentation, because it helps us start thinking about, after all the data, all the information, what kind of service do we want to provide? What level of service do we want to provide it at? How many people do we want to reach? And then we can start, going behind the scenes to see what that really looks like and the financial impact it would have to the organization.
Quick
We
question.
have two hands raised at this.
A third one, too, because
Okay.
Director Hudson's hand is
Raise my hand.
literally.
Go ahead.
Is this 50% of reach like sort of like an industry standard best practice, or, I'm just curious, is that?
Well, so a couple of responses to that. So depending on the type of system you have, there are different metrics as far as what percentage reach. When we looked at the Tampa Bay partnership, their presentation, they talked about if we increased our reach, what that would do overall for the economy. So this 50% reach is really more in alignment with that most recent study, to just kind of say, if we were to tick the dial up, recognizing what that financial impact or economic impact would be, what do we have to do to at least try to make that happen? And if you remember, they had all the different layers.
It just seems a little bit crude of a measurement in some ways. I'm just curious whether something like that arrival, that heat map, I thought was really interesting, and granted, it takes a while to think through really what that means, but something like, the frequency of service relative to the proximity of those high-density locations, because it seems like that's really the core. I mean, just expanding more 60% or 60-minute frequency doesn't necessarily seem like a great idea, and I don't think anyone thinks that's a good idea.
Nobody thinks that's
Yeah,
a great idea, and I think that's also, so it's not going to be a system where there's one metric,
Sure.
right? So, we need to have a conversation around frequency, and then also, we need to be deliberate on the 50% that we're trying to reach. So if you think about the previous maps, it's not the 50% that's not in a dense location and that's further away. It would be, those areas that we've identified that are ripe for transit ridership. We're only accessing 32% of those riders. So if we were able to increase it to 50% of the riders that are in dense locations, all of the attributes that support a transit rider's, I guess you would say persona, if we could increase service and increase frequency along with that, what would that do for us? And then also a part of our conversation, should be around frequency. You know, we do have service standards right now, and the longest we did in this last update the service standards, so the longest frequency we have now is 60 minutes, and we used to go beyond 60 minutes for frequency, so we won't have anything that runs longer than that. But I would hope that through our conversations, we start looking at, you know, maybe our goal, again, by some specific timeline, is to have no frequency less than 30 minutes, let's say. And then we work toward getting that, but then we also understand the financial implication of getting to nowhere, you know, longer than 30 minutes.
Well, and we do have a couple other commissioners, but I'd just like to say that downtown partnership, the Tampa Bay partnership, with the study that they just put out, the metric they used is within 1 hour. The metric that, for people to reach to their destination. And that would mean frequency, because they would have to switch sometimes within a grid system on that to get to their place within 1 hour. What I've seen and looked at is how many people can travel from their origin to destination within 45 minutes as a target, because you're really helping those, because they show that people won't really be using if it takes them longer than 45 minutes. And so that would include a more frequent opportunity, and also, again, the ability to transfer and do that trip within 45 minutes, which I think is a metric I've seen that I think seems to help as a judgment. I just state that out there. But we do have Commissioner Overman, you recognized.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly to get a better feel for how we're approaching this. The slide shows that the annual operating cost of serving 32% of the population is $86.2 million, correct? And then we have to increase it to 50%. It's the $134.5 million plus 48.3 of, I'm assuming, operating costs. So is the 134 the additional buses we would need, or capital investment we would need to be able to increase that level of service? Am I reading that correctly?
No, the 48 is the estimated increase over 86, so the new total would be 134.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, is there a capital increase that we need to also take into consideration in the plan before? Because obviously, if we have what, 177 buses, you know, to get to that level of coverage, we would have to have a capital investment for that as well, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we probably need to, in the long term, need to know what that number looks like. But I think part of the other issue, as it pertains to the next slide, is really in looking at that and why this strategic plan is so important, is identifying how do we get to that 50% by incorporating the transit supportive policies we were talking about earlier. If to the point of, you can't just put bus service everywhere to get more than 50%. We have to it would seem as though we would need to be very strategic about how HART partners with the city of Tampa and, Temple Terrace, Plant City, and Hillsborough County on their TOD policies for identifying where people live and where jobs are created to help facilitate the maximizing the opportunity to serve those in those corridors. Is that in line with what the transit supportive policy would be?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're currently working with the MPO and the city on some projections on just a few corridors to kind of see what kind of growth could be absorbed on the transit network with our existing service, and then with modest increases in frequency. So we're doing the same exercises with our other peer agencies during this process, but that's exactly right.
Because currently we have bus service in certain areas of our county that, density is starting to infill but they haven't been identified as transit emphasis or transit corridors or transit-oriented development zones. They don't have the actual zoning for it at the moment, but it would seem as though they would be appropriate for it. And so is part of this process being able to work in partnership with the land use folks and the development folks for identifying areas that should be designated as a TOD so that HART can implement its service in those areas efficiently?
Yeah, that's part of the longer-term process. I think in some of our conversations with agency staff to date, we're trying to focus on what we have right now while we identify those places for the future. But really try to see what we can capitalize with good development, if you will, quote unquote, along our existing service routes where we can start getting more out of what we already operate and trying to fill those empty seats on our buses with good development now while we strive to reach maybe some places we don't serve currently that are growing in a fairly transit supportive way in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
And Director Hudson, did you have another?
Sure. This is more a comment than a question, but I can't overemphasize how important it is that this strategic planning effort be integrated into what the county and the city of Tampa are doing with their comprehensive plans. As someone who works in that space, legally speaking, all zoning decisions need to be downstream consistent with the jurisdiction's comprehensive plan. I think there are some efforts going on now to change those. The city of Tampa has some really great but inchoate policies about TOD, and then the county does as well. And so I think those things are happening now, and to give some real teeth to this HART strategic plan, if there are elements in those comprehensive plans that can make a huge difference in how development decisions are evaluated. So just want to pass that along.
And Director McLean?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Going back to Commissioner Overman's conversation, I think she was pretty much spot on, but if you also go back to Ms. Adele's conversation where she mentioned incrementally increasing who we serve over the years in this 20-year plan, I think that's where that all plays out at. As we do it incrementally, we can do it very targeted and very strategic, if you will, as Commissioner Overman mentioned. The one thing I would also like to see as we go through this is, of course, as we increase, there's a price to be paid, and so where will the funding come from to cover those costs of increasing our service to that 50% reach, if you will. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I kind of had this slide pulled back. I realized it was the crudest of kind of outlying, possibilities, not a suggestion that this is our future plan, just because I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. I know that's what you said, and it's just kind of to give us a picture. And I think it's a really valuable picture for us to see. This is just operation costs, not capital, but operations being the heart of, again, 70% of any transit needs. But we would certainly have significant more capital costs, but to see that this is operations at de minimis at that 50% level, I just think it's just a good, crude, as I said, I'm not sure other word to use, but imprecise or, just the big possibility if we did made no choices and just if this was our only goal. And so I don't want, I know you all have said that that's not the only goal here. You're just trying to give that picture, and I just want to reemphasize that so no one, especially in the public, starts to have the wrong idea. But I'll let you speak to that, Mr. Willits.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of our takeaways, obviously, for next phases of this plan is to dig in a little bit further to what that 50% could be, or, based on kind of the direction of the board, say, if we want to hit 50% of our low income or minority or density over a certain threshold with a baseline of 30 minutes, we can kind of game that out in some scenarios and talk about that further. But yeah, that was just kind of a starting point and kind of puts us in the right direction of what we can show and talk about.
Thank you.
And then, excuse me, Justin, if you don't mind, I know Director Hudson talked about collaboration with other ongoing efforts, so if you want to share how we are collaborating to respond to that, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, we're working with the Planning Commission staff right now to identify kind of existing densities that are supportive, what corridors have some potential in the near term, and then going through the same process with the city, taking some of our old transit emphasis corridors identified in like 2005, for those that are still pretty consistent with our existing service, you know, Hillsborough, Florida, Nebraska, 56th Street, and really trying to identify the upper limits of the growth potential along those corridors where we know we can absorb trips. We're going to do some calculations that talk about the existing capacity for us to get more people on our existing service that's already really performing well anyway, but how we can translate that into policy for the short, medium, and long term. So a lot of that is kind of the most fun part of what we do, but to seeing that put into action along corridors where we already have service is really kind of the best first thing to do. While we identify those corridors experiencing growth that don't necessarily have transit now, where we know we need to get to in the future.
Great, and I think you don't, okay. So I don't think anybody else has their hands up or wants to speak at this time, so I think we can move on with the presentation.
Madam Chair, this is pretty much the end of the presentation to just bring us back to the beginning of, where we started, our current mission and our current vision, and as Ms. LeGrand previously stated, is does this vision, does this mission take us to where this agency wants to be? And this is the opportunity and the first conversation that we will be having about this. And as Ms. LeGrand stated, a conversation that we'll be having internally as well.
Excellent. I was worried that didn't want to slow down too much on the slides, but I know that was the invitation, and I think it worked out well. I didn't expect this to be end here, so this is good. I don't know.
The real deal.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's great. Good opening here, and I see Commissioner Overman has her hand raised. Commissioner Overman?
Yes, thank you very much. Many of you know that, or those that we were able to stay up late enough last week, at the TIP hearing, there was a support at the MPO level of FDOT's offer to update the calculation and numbers associated with beginning the conversation with CSX regarding the rail lines. Now, granted, that project is going to be, whatever the new name is for whatever the biggest level of transit investment would be at the federal level, because they keep changing the names. But it's not Small Star. It's not. Is it RAISE? What's the new terminology for transit investment? But that clearly, if we were to take the federal route to expand the regional access of the CSX lines to serve, for example, Oldsmar, USF, downtown, maybe even Brandon and Plant City, that's a big picture. But if we're able to actually begin that conversation, it would be a 10 to 15, year process. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But I think it's important for us to realize that while we've had, the discussion with looking at passenger rail service on our priority list for the last 31 years, that having FDOT be willing to update the calculations based on all the studies that have been done so far, and to begin the conversations with all the stakeholders, HART's a very important part of that conversation, obviously. And so I wanted to make sure that while we are absolutely focused on our core mission of providing bus service throughout the area of Hillsborough in one way, shape, or another, in the best utilization and in the best way that we can provide service and frequency as needed, I think it also is important to incorporate, long-term, even though it may not be within the immediate scope of this strategic plan, that the efforts to bring passenger rail as an option, as a transit option within Hillsborough County has been on the table for a very long time. And as we've seen, as Director McLean had mentioned or questioned, is our TDHP, we have a plan, but we don't have a strategic plan. We haven't had a strategic plan in a way that wasn't just project-based. We've done 11, I think it is, or 12 studies regarding the CSX lines over the years, and yet it doesn't seem to move forward because it's not, in my opinion, been adequately added to HART and or the counties in general strategic plan. So I'm hoping that while it is still a much longer term outcome, that as our strategic plan evolves and develops, that we don't take something that's been on the agenda for over 30 years and leave it off because we're very focused on what we can do now. And I don't want to take away from that, but I think it's important that we incorporate that longer term vision for Hillsborough County, given what we see in the way of population growth in the area, as well as the potential for federal funding that may not have been easily acquired before. In talking with FDOT prior to the MPO meeting, it became readily clear that if we don't take the federal route for funding, our region will not be able to move forward with passenger rail in any near time period. At least with the federal process, it does permit the feds to provide approximately 40 to 50% of the funding of the project. The state would provide, through FDOT and other funding, 25%, and at local level, we would do 25% match in order to invest and create that kind of facility, a transit facility. When we choose not to go that route, which is what we've historically, I think, looked at as a region, it ends up being 85% of our cost. And I don't believe any of us believe that we could ever do that, which is why it keeps being on the long-range priority list, but never move forward. So I wanted to, for this particular group with the strategic planning in mind, to bring that up to not only make sure that the board was aware of it, but also to help understand that I'm not interested in foregoing our ground transit level bus service at all. But I do believe that we do need to incorporate in this strategic plan that conversation so that it can in fact start moving forward, given it's been on our priority list for many, many years. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. I know we looked at the broadest of conversations today, not kind of the specifics. And I think many people know, I've been around with the CSX rail map for at least a number of years in the community. We did put it on last year on the TIP, at the MPO, the Transportation Improvement Projects, for $3.5 million to get that looked at. And I, was hoping that we would be moving forward on that. It wasn't, with the conversations that were around the region at that time, it wasn't exactly going on in particular. I think what the conversations at TBARDA, as well, this board, the HART board, has voted at least twice by overwhelming majorities. And by the way, the MPO vote last year and this year were overwhelming majorities to pursue this as a project of interest. I don't think anybody ever believed we could do it without federal or state money, in particular matching. And again, I know, and so and I feel many people are very supportive of looking at how CSX would connect, particularly the first leg of that from USF. It goes right from USF, south of Fowler Avenue, down to Ybor City, across to the Art Museum in downtown Tampa, and then down through South Tampa. It's through the most transit-dense area of transit users in the entire region when it goes from USF to downtown for trips. And I know Commissioner Overman had said about longer term, 10, 15 years, but I like to remind people just when we talk about this that Sunrail in Orlando, they have converted CSX tracks all over the country. In Florida, they did that decades ago in Miami with Tri-Rail, and that operates to this day between Miami and Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach as a commuter rail option, and that's been operating for decades. Sunrail just opened in about 2014. Sunrail is the rail line that's in Orlando, that's CSX converted, I think in all, it's some 90 miles. Part of it is still opening up. And that was done actually from the start of conversations to the end because the track already exists. You're not going after right away. You're not going after all kinds of other things. And there was a huge push there on the part of the mayor and the congressperson there and others. And I know I would say Congresswoman Castor has frequently expressed her strong interest to me in moving forward on this. But Sunrail, from the start of conversations till operations, was 8 years. But 3 years of those were negotiating out a contract with the state. So that 3-year window there has already been done. And that was, converted from rail to stations to the cars that they needed, everything they needed to make that conversion. And basically under 8 years, but truly 5 years. And it's a model, it's 60 miles away. I at one time invited this board to go out there, and many people from this board went with us out there. I've been out there with FDOT before, so I see that being something not so much as the long term, but the shorter term to explore and see how that would fit in our options for the short term. So I'd like to agree with Commissioner Overman's point, and that is out there. The other project that I've worked quite extensively on that we haven't gotten into all these specifics here, but is how the ferry service can serve Hillsborough County. And last week, at the board meeting last week, we agreed at the BOCC it's been managed by St. Petersburg and Mayor Kreisman over the last 4 years, to service between Tampa and St. Pete. We agreed to assume management of that particular service, intercity service between St. Pete and Tampa at last week's meeting, and we've been in contact with the other regions. It's been actually supported by 5 different jurisdictions: City of Tampa, City of St. Pete, Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, as well as FDOT. And so we expect to not only have that regional service continue, but expand from being 6 months to being 12 months by 2024. So it's a year-round operation, and there's been overwhelming support for that. And as well, we're looking into and continue to look into, and I'm just saying this just like the big picture here, especially for everybody just to understand kind of what's going out there, that I can contribute to that. But there's still ongoing work at the county level right now about the project, which would be more in the commuter vein from South County, which very much wants service. And if we could add that in to the Tampa St. Pete weekend and evening service, but also the daily service from McDill, from South County to McDill, which has been served in the frequent, I don't know about now during COVID, what has happened, but we had more than 100 van pulls with between 5 and 15 people going from East or South County to McDill, an hour around when they could go across in 13 minutes on a ferry. A lot of great interest and support for that. And not only that, we have extensive bus service, as you've looked at, I'm sure, in this, that goes from South County around, not to mention thousands of cars every day as they arrive at McDill, which requires an hour and 15-minute drive for many people, getting longer. So that is also another transit project that's out there in the I look at near term, something that could be done in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years in the near term for transit service.
No, that's all of what you have shared and what Director Overman has also presented is a part of the process. And if you look on the screen, I had them put the process slide back up. And, right now we're in the visioning phase. And, we're really at a very high level. We're talking about our mission, our vision, and our goals. And then, how do we want to measure ourselves, right? So the point there is we don't want to put out a goal that we can't measure to be able to come back and say we were able to accomplish this goal. So that's what we're focusing on right now. The specific projects or strategies as far as, what is it that we'd like to build out, that will come in the evaluation of options. So everything that you've shared, the collective view as far as CSX corridor, the ferry, or any other projects, those would be, those options that we're looking at and we're building upon and understanding long-term and short-term investments and what they look like. This is a 20-year plus plan, so there will be some things that will be in the shorter period of time, but there'll also be some projects that take us out to 20 years. The good news is that we're also, outside of this strategic planning effort, working with a firm that's building our 20-year financial model. So the intention here is, as we're going through the strategic planning effort, when we come up with the projects that we want to implement, and a project could also be, changing the service structure or increasing the frequency and things like that, but we'll be able to then go into the model and actually see financially what the impact would be to HART. So again, we have a tool that we can use to help us make those annual decisions when it comes to budget time. So, I think that everything that has been mentioned is very important that staff captures. We also have, as I think it was the second or third slide, the whole, slide of every report that already exists today that lists several projects that are transportation projects that may be areas that HART either wants to support or has been supporting formally already. There's several, as Director Overman mentioned, there's several priorities that have been discussed over the years, so staff has collected that as well. So we do have a great catalog of what the specific projects are. What we do not have, like there was a lot of conversation about, the background on CSX or the ferry, but what we don't have is a clear understanding of what it is that HART wants to do. Right? What is our vision? Why do we want to implement these projects? What are they allowing us to do that we committed that we'd be able to do to the community? And because we're investing in this, we're doing it. Right? That's the piece that's missing. We can't tie any of these projects to an overarching vision of something that we've committed to our community that we're going to do for them. So that's what we need to really start wrapping our minds around, who are we and what is our role in this space? And it's difficult, it's kind of like writing your own bio, right? It's difficult to kind of write it down and say, this is who I am. And typically the best bios are written from somebody other than yourself. But we have to take on this exercise to really start to define who we are. And the intention is not that we do it all in one day. This is something that we can think about, but we have to start having the conversation. Because right now, our vision says that HART invites, inspires, and implements sustainable and innovative transportation. So is that our aspirational goal? Are we saying that within the next 20 years, we're going to work hard? Because a vision is something that you have to work hard to achieve, right? And you're working tirelessly over whatever, period of time to accomplish that vision. So are we saying that that really represents the vision that we're saying for the next 20 years, we're going to work really hard to invite, inspire, and implement sustainable and innovative transportation? And does that mean something to the community? Do they understand what that means? Can they see themselves in that? And if not, this is our opportunity to revisit it and put a statement out that people can actually see themselves in, and they understand what it's going to take or what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Because once we get there, what does that look like, right? So, the hope today was in this part of our meeting for the next, 20 minutes or so, was to just have some dialogue around, from everyone represents, outside of the board, you all represent a different space. So from where, you're coming from, and in your world outside of being on the HART board, where do you see HART playing in the future? What role do you see us having? And if we can start just kind of throwing it out like in a brainstorming manner, then we can, come back again and start having conversations. Okay, how does that look like a concise, cohesive vision? So I'll start, from where I am as the CEO of HART now for just a couple of months. I see us really being an agency that is providing a competitive mobility choice. That it's a choice that not one sector of the population is using because they're low income or transit dependent, but it's a choice that everybody who has to move around this county can rely on because it's efficient, it's effective, and it is reliable. So that's for me from where I'm sitting.
And, okay, Director Hudson.
I think that's great. I mean, one question I have is, do we need a mission, a vision, a motto, and a definition of, I'm just curious, what the difference
That's a
between
great
all
question.
those are, yeah.
So mission is primarily what you're doing right now.
Okay,
So right now, we're saying that HART takes people to places that enhance their lives. In a nutshell, what our mission is saying is HART takes people places.
right.
And we do. So a mission is what you're doing today. This is what we're doing. Every morning when we get up, I come here to take people places. We could say more in our mission if that's, we want to look at that, but that's what our mission is. The vision is really about what do you want to aspire toward? You're taking people places right now. We're doing the basics, the way I read what we have currently. We're doing the basics, we're taking people places. So what is it that we want to do in the future? What are we working toward doing more than what we're doing today? And that's what the vision. The motto, I think, is just, I don't know why we have a motto, but I think maybe it's just something catchy.
Right.
No.
I like the motto. It's
Yeah,
kind of a mission and a vision.
Yeah.
I despite being a lawyer, try to be brief.
Right.
And I think maybe imposing a little bit of a word count wouldn't be the
Right.
worst thing. But I think what you just said is a great way to center things. 50, 100 years from now, I think HART is going to have an enormous impact, far greater than people realize. The decisions we make today and shaping what the city looks like 100 years from now. I think we can kind of bear that in mind.
So that's something we can throw into the box, the decisions that HART is making over, let's say, the next 20 years, how is it impacting the region or the county over
Right.
the next 100 years? Right?
And one related to that, I'll not to give people homework, but there's certainly some great literature out there about, what the streetcar did to the city and its foundational state, where we literally are in Ybor City. And so I think kind of looking backwards a little bit wouldn't be the worst thing as we think about what's to come, because again, to the point about the 100 years, or you think about things in 7 generations, however you want to frame it, we're living today with the built environment that is a consequence of decisions that were made a long time ago, and so we got to be really careful when we think about how we're going to use that responsibility. And I'm going to really call it power, but that responsibility now.
Right, and I think part of what I'm getting from what you're saying also is that, there was a time when we put transit investment out there because we were looking at it as, there's a need, right, to get from A to B. But now we know that investment in transit has a direct correlation to economic growth. And, maybe our vision is to, make sure that HART is playing a major role in the economic growth of the region, right, through our investments. That may be something that, we can look at. And again, these ideas we're throwing out, they might not find their way as the vision, but it can lead us towards some goals, right? So maybe that's something that's more of a goal. But I do agree with you that now that we know, we should be deliberate in making sure that we're utilizing our service not only to get people from here to there, but to also support the economic growth.
Yeah, it's not a bus agency that drives the economy. It's an economic driver that happens to have a bus.
Exactly.
And I think we need to think about things in that order.
That's a great one.
When I had the same questions as you about mission and vision, so that was very good clarifying. And I think what you said at the beginning, and I think it'd be valuable if you could just repeat that, because I thought it was,
Okay. No problem. So,
you've gotten to think about it a lot more than
Yes.
the rest of us.
yes, I've been living in this space for a long time. So a mission is, primarily what you're currently doing. The service we're providing today, what it is that we're.
It wasn't so much that as the statement you made before that about a competitive, the statement you made, which I guess you said.
Oh, what I said, my
A
idea.
motto or.
I don't know. A competitive mobility choice? Yes.
Competitive transportation choice, effective, efficient, reliable.
There we go.
A competitive mobility.
Competitive
Choice.
transportation choice that is effective, efficient, and reliable.
Yeah,
Those-
I think that's an excellent statement of where I'd like to see us move to. But I see Commissioner Overman has her hand raised. Commissioner Overman?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm absolutely loving this conversation, but there's a part of the vision that I think we have to be very cognizant of within, our timeline for creating this strategic plan. And given that our goal is to be, have it fully developed by the end of next year, part of the vision has the word implement in it. And much of what we're talking about will require the funding, ongoing funding, and the financial wherewithal to meet the mission and the vision of both, sustainable and innovative transportation options that serve our community well, given what we've seen in our projections as far as our growth and where we see our current footprint when it comes to housing and economic opportunity in overall Hillsborough County. That being said, the timeline works rather well that we're doing this because the Board of County Commission will be bringing, hopefully through the workshops that occur over the next several months, a strategy for developing transportation resources, which would, I assume, include HART and the funding of HART for our transit within our overall mobility transportation plan. So given that we don't have the previous surtax in place, and it appears as though we're on a path for creating one, this conversation, this strategic plan, the elements associated with it, I believe are critically important to clearly identify, even though they're project related, but if they're part of our overall, sustainable and innovative transportation plan vision, we need to make sure that they're very clear so that they can be incorporated in the work that's going to be put together to frame how a revenue source, whether it's a surtax or other source, could in fact provide HART with the resources to move those that mission and that vision forward. So I'm really glad to see that we're making good progress. The goal here would be to be best prepared for the discussion by the time we go to ask voters to do that, and the next timeline for that would be next November of 22. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I'm really glad we're having the process of establishing a strategic plan for our transit agency. But timing really does matter. And so the best opportunity I think we have for really, discussing what's incorporated in this plan needs to also recognize that if a surtax were to come into place, and if it were 20 to 30 years for the time frame for that tax, that I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that not only we're addressing our short-term and intermediate-term goals, but to clearly identify what our long-term goals are as well. And I'll stop there.
So I think that that's great insight, and just I would say paint the picture. Right now, we're trying to take a look at our vision and making sure that we are crafting a vision that helps us to get to some sort of horizon year and accomplish several things. The other thing is, as an agency, and I said this, I think it was in response to Director McLean's question, we don't have goals. So we have to create those goals. So if you remember that process slide again, a part of what we're doing from now to the end of the year, in addition to revisiting our vision statement, is also developing goals, because none of our projects are tied to specific goals. And, this is not unique. I don't want it to seem as though HART is doing something that's so, strange and no one else has done this. It's not unique that you have a list of projects in a TDP or a TIP, but you don't have any goals, and you can't really say how those projects are helping you to achieve goals. That's what we're going to do now. So what we want to do, it's not saying that we're going to get rid of any priorities or any projects that may exist, and it's not saying that we might not identify any new projects to add to our list, but they need to be tied to some goals. So do we have a goal around sustainability? And if one of our goals is to create a more sustainable environment with use of transit, then what are the projects that support that goal? And is the CSX project one of those projects that supports that goal? Is it the ferry service? Is it electric vehicles? But right now, everything that I stated, those are projects we have, but they're not tied to a goal, right? So again, if we say that one of our goals is to provide more frequent and timely service, then, what are we saying then? What are the projects? Increase our frequency, or, reduce all routes that are 60 minutes or that are greater than 30 minutes within the next 5 years. Is that one of our projects that we're going to work on to implement? So I'm using this as an illustrative way of showing that right now we have a bunch of projects. We don't have them connected to any goals, and our vision may not be the vision that we want to hold on to for the next 30 years, right? And so that's the piece. These are the pieces that we're trying to knit together. And then through, once we have the vision and then we have goals to support that vision, then we can start looking at those strategies to implement the goal.
And Councilman Schizler, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. These are all good points, everybody. And particularly with the information from you, Commissioner Kemp, regarding the ferry system, because that was going to be one of my questions. Where do we stand with that planning? I know planning stage as far as the county was concerned. I think it's one point that I have not heard anybody discuss. Oh, I'm sorry, digress. Also, Commissioner Oberman, the discussion on funding and future increases to cover whatever it's going to take to get all these projects and tie them all together into the common goals and mission and vision. But one of the things that I have not seen or heard anything of, and I'm don't expect anything to discuss today on it, but just that management needs to be very cognizant of the sales job that's going to be needed to communicate to the public. We can do every goal in the world, but until we can convince people that to sit on the bus, on the train, on the ferry, whatever it be, it's not going to work. So we need to, as part of the planning, just keep in mind the communication and sales job that we're going to have to give to the public. And it's going to be very, very critical, I believe, before any kind of tax surtax or any kind of surtax is approved. The last surtax passed by the electorate. However, we all know that it was overturned in the courts. So there's been a tremendous amount of bad publicity, right or wrong, it doesn't matter, but a lot of publicity regarding this. And I think it's going to be a hard sell for the upcoming vote that's going to be needed by the public. So I think we need to make sure that the communications and sales job that's going to be necessary as part of the overall strategy of development as we go forward. And I'll stop there.
And Director Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I kind of wanted to piggyback on Councilman Schisler's comments and, excuse me, and also kind of, back at the regular board meeting where Ms. LeGrand made a very good comment about making sure that we are, as far as kind of running things like a business to a point to where, we want to make sure that we know exactly what our consumers want.
Director Johnson, can you get a little closer to your mic? We're having difficulty hearing you. I'm sorry.
Are you sure your mic is on?
It's on.
Okay.
I got the little lights here.
I could hear you fine. I just wondered because that's a mistake I made, so.
I'll try. Okay, I think that we're good here. Is that good, Commissioner Overman?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Quickly, just to repeat myself, I think the comments that Ms. LeGrand had made at the regular board meeting about making sure that we are identifying what the consumer is actually wanting, and that we are going to be, in thinking about how our goals and our vision, how all that's going to work together. I think that's going to be important, and kind of piggybacking off of what the Councilman Schisler's comments were. And then we need to make sure that, the marketing efforts or whatever outreach and communication efforts that we're going to be able to have, I think it's going to be critical to get all of those together, because I think, and obviously this is not Ms. LeGrand's fault, since she just got here, but I think we've got a lot of, we got to make sure that, some of the problems that we had in previous CEOs, we're not going to repeat those, and I think you've done a tremendous job getting us onto a path to be able to not repeat any of those mistakes. And, the fact that we did not have a strategic plan, is a little frightening just to think about it right now. But I think that we're in a good spot to be able to do that. Just want to make sure that we are identifying everybody and, making sure that, we know what they want before we start creating our goals for, maybe a constituency that may not necessarily want those goals to be taken care of. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I don't see any more hands raised. And I'm just very pleased with this moving forward in this very broadest of ways. I didn't think we had a strategic plan, even though I'm chair of the Strategic Planning Committee. And I never... and I thought it was something we needed to do, and something I've been as 4.5 years on HART, that I was frustrated that we had never moved in this direction, it didn't seem, and never had these extremely important conversations as we move forward. So I'm really pleased. I think we do have to start in the broadest of ways. And you introduced just the barest of kind of metrics and I apologize a little for emphasizing or the one slide, but I also think as we move forward, it's obviously part of all we have to take into account. I feel very confident about the community. We had a 47% vote before in support of robust or more robust transit. We have the most underfunded, as I've said many, many times, the most underfunded transit system in the country for any metro area of this size, not by just a little bit, but by a huge amount that I don't think people really realize. We are, in my mind, always in crisis in terms of the, inability of us to provide a reasonable transit system, one that, we can look at as we grow as a city, as an economic center, one that provides opportunities. I look at it as something that is so important for people to have opportunities to move in other places, get to jobs in other places, or get to things that enrich their lives in other places, whatever that is. And I just, we've been, I think, so far, so sadly behind. And I even say, compared to, for instance, Pinellas right across the bay, which is 1/3 the size and area that we have, and so much more densely populated, and collects more millage than we do for their transit system to support it. And that's just one example. And their transit system's underfunded, but not as incredibly underfunded as we are here at HART. That provides us with too little opportunity to serve the community in the way that this community has grown to, I think, start to expect, but also to serve it in a way that is reasonable as we move forward. So I'm very excited about this. I'm excited to have, I'll say, Ms. LaGrange, you on board, kind of directing this effort, because I think this is a great starting point. And to look at it in this broad way, as you pointed out, and to think about what we're doing here as a board, but as a community, to put out, and I've never felt like we've had an achievable vision. I think that that's kind of what drives almost a lot of fantasy projects, is that there are never, there's never metrics used for cost or ridership or service, or where it gets people in terms of a competitive transportation mobility option that's efficient, effective, and reliable. I don't think that has been out there to kind of guide our vision and what we set forward in the future. So I, for one, am ready to see this keep moving, and I do think it's going to be a robust and a process that works over time. But I'm really very excited to see this first step.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank the team as well, because they've been working on this. I think this was one of my first assignments when I got here, and I asked them to start looking at previous studies, just reading through everything that's already been written, for us to start cataloging what the recommendations are in all these studies related to the business that we are in. And they've gone through that process and put this information together for our conversation today. So thank you, team, for doing that. And then also in response to Director Schisler's question, a part of this process is engagement. And that's why we're going to continue this conversation until the end of this calendar year, with not only talking with you, but talking internally and then to our partners, and just asking the first series of questions, which are, where do you see HART and how does HART support what you're doing, right? Because part of our conversation needs to be, how does the service we provide enhance or improve what others are doing? What role do we play? So we can start getting this information down and gathering it. And we'll be using this to help us to, again, reframe our vision as well as develop goals. So we'll be back to you again as this process continues with updates. And I know we weren't able to hear from everyone as far as your thoughts around a vision or how HART is supporting the space that you're in outside of serving as a HART board member. But if you feel like something comes into your head after this meeting today, please do not hesitate to send that to staff, and we will collect it and keep it up as a part of the process. So with that, I would say we're done with our presentation, and thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for giving us 2 hours to have this conversation. I know Director Schisler and Chair Kemp, thank you both for agreeing to do a joint meeting so that we could have this allotment of time.
Great. So we stand adjourned, I guess, just for a couple of minutes till the Finance Committee.
Yes.